Okay, so today I have Dr. Patrick Flynn, a father of 4 children, a husband, a man that is making an impact on health, wanting to leave the world a better place. I love what he's doing. He's a best-selling author, a speaker. He has clinics from Hawaii to Ireland, all healing people in a more natural way than modern medicine, which has been pretty scary in my experience. Did I miss anything, brother? Please let me know. What did I leave out?
Just a small-time country boy. Yeah.
Doing big things, man. I love it.
Well, just trying to add value to people's lives.
How did you come about? How did these thoughts come to you about? Did you stumble across some information, to see things different? Did you used to see things in the more modern way that modern doctors do?
Well, my story started out, let's say, in a story of suffering. As a young child, I was diagnosed as a juvenile delinquent, third grade. I remember sitting with the counselors. My mom has been on my show, and she's talked about this, and talking about, I was sitting with the counselor, and they looked at it and said, if he doesn't get help, he's going to be in prison someday. And so I was diagnosed juvenile delinquent. Grades were horrible, and I always felt like my brain was going 100 miles an hour, and I always felt like I was, my skin was crawling. And then through different things that happened when I was 13, I started to, understand health a little bit, and I started an investigation of what was kind of going on with me, and I went and my grades improved, and then I realized that, the more holistic natural approach was the way I wanted to go, and I started figuring things out as a teenager, went to college, got done with college, went to graduate school, postgraduate, everything like that. And I opened my first clinic, and I got extremely busy. And I know I'm giving you just a short synopsis. We can go in more detail in a little bit. But then what happened is I started with one clinic, and like I said, and you said before in the intro, now I have clinics all over the U.S. mainly, and we have some in Europe, and we're expanding. We just got a European trademark and things like that. And I said what it came down to was I just see it just a little bit differently, and I believe that modern medicine, as a lot of people have some negative things to say about it, I could go on all day about that too. But I believe that there's a position for all of us. It's just that we've been so dominated and tried to be forced, especially during COVID, forced in one way of thinking. And when we talk about things today, I'm going to make it extremely simple and extremely simple to understand, to where people now could take control of their health and don't have to always be dependent on some form of a doctor, including myself, to actually attain it.
I love it, man. I love it. What do you think about, is there a crazy difference between women's and men's hormones? What is the biggest difference?
Well, there's a huge difference. And first I want to set the stage for all this is we need to actually just get people to think a little bit differently. And so I love analogies, because I think with analogies we can really connect to people because we can now relate to them. I think that empathy is one of the greatest things we need in healthcare. But a lot of people, if you see the fights that people get in politics and in healthcare and other topics, it's actually, they're talking about sympathy, not empathy, okay? Now, empathy, for example, is I could put myself in anybody's shoes. I could put myself in my whole care, pretty much all 26 years, with the exception of the first couple of years, was female healthcare. Well, then I'm not a woman. Okay, we'll get into that in a little bit too. Okay, I'm not a woman, but I could empathize. Now, I couldn't sympathize with a woman because I couldn't feel the same thing that they felt. See, people are like, you don't care. No, you want me to feel the way you do. I say, and I can understand, but I tell people, I'm probably the least sympathetic person you ever meet on the planet. Just because I can empathize with you and put myself in your shoes, it doesn't mean I feel the way you do on any political or healthcare issue. Do you see the difference? Sure. Now. Yes. And so I want to set the stage on, come up with an analogy, so then when I talk about male or females, if I talk about vaccines, if I talk about holistic care compared to medical care, I always tell people this. When I was 13 years old and I started to look at healthcare, I'm like, oh my goodness. And then what people do is they get so frustrated with medical care because they were either hurt, damaged, disappointed, not getting help. But then you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because there are some good things. So then I'm going to give you the greatest analogy that I created a long time ago. It's in every book. It's every talk I ever did this way. If I speak to a medical group, a pharmacist, a chiropractic group, a naturopathic group, I start with this example because it sets the stage for everything I do. And everything I believe that will make so much sense, and then people going forward use this analogy all the time. See, I say, listen, you got to look at healthcare in two realms. You know, if we look at the medical field, I like to call them the fire department. For example, Jerry, if you left here tonight and you were at home and your house caught on fire, you know, who's the first professional you would call if your house is on fire?
Fire department.
That's right. Why wouldn't you call your dentist?
Because they wouldn't know what to do.
But wait, that's a doctor. They're professional. They have a degree. But see, you're like, Doc, that makes no sense. But I'm going to get to that in just a second, okay?
Yeah.
So the fire department, let's look what happens when they get there. They're going to jump out of the truck, and there's only two tools they really have, an axe and a hose. Now, I usually ask more questions, but I want to get through this so we can get to our topics. But I have to set stage this way. The guy with the axe is going to run up to your door, Jerry. He's going to break it down. He's going to break your window down. The guy with the hose is going to run. He's going to start spraying the inside of your house. Now, if you have pictures of your kids or valuables or things in there, the water itself is going to destroy it. It's going to destroy the wall. It's going to destroy the carpet. But here's what happens. And the fire department has been there for about 15 minutes so far, and what have they done to your house, Jerry?
It's going to just be bad, right?
They destroyed it, and you're actually kind of grateful. Because you know why? Because if they get there in time and do their job as a professional, they stopped your whole house from burning down. But can you agree with me, during the process of saving your house, they caused some destruction. Fair enough?
Yeah, now it might be a little worse on top of it.
Yeah, but at least you didn't lose your house.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, let's say a fire department was walking around and say, Jerry, I'm amazing. I'm great at what I did. And then they look at you and say, Jerry, here's what happens. I'm going to help you rebuild your house with an axe and a hose. What would you say to that professional that just saved your house?
What was that? Sorry, I had to put these on.
Well, so let's say that now the fire department got done with the job. They're like, Jerry, I'm amazing at my job. But what if they said to you, Jerry, with the tools and education I have, I'm going to help you rebuild your house with an axe and a hose. What would you say to them?
No.
Yeah, it makes no sense. See, you even laugh. It's like asking a dentist to put out the fire. Now, here's the point.
Definitely not.
You're going to need a totally different professional that has different tools, different background, sees the house different, because here's what happens this. When the fire department's done, they're walking around going, Jerry, I'm amazing. Look what I did to put out this fire. But then you're going to call a carpenter to rebuild the house. A carpenter's going to walk in the same exact house. And even if the fire department just told you they did a wonderful job, he looks at the house from a different perspective and says, this is a mess, Jerry. I got to rip out this wall, the carpet. I got to do everything and rebuild it up. Now, who's right? They both are. If the house is on fire and the carpenter shows up and says, Jerry, I have nails and hammer and plaster, like, dude, you're going to kill yourself if you go in there, it's on fire. But it's no different than if the fire department asked you to rebuild your house with an axe and a hose. If you understand that example, you'll understand everything about healthcare and how I view it and how we can affect the world positively. For example, if you had a heart attack and stroke right now, let's say your house caught on fire, guess what happens? You may need drugs or surgery to stay alive, but during the process, could you agree that there could be some positive negative side effects?
For sure, 100%.
And they even could damage some organs and stuff like that, but at least you didn't die. Thank the doctors, great job, you're awesome. But if you stay on that medication every single day for a long period of time, would you agree with me that your house will rot out?
1,000%.
Because you know why? Who said so? The people who made the drug. The people who made the drug. Here's the consequence of doing this long term. Well, what if I told you that as a carpenter doctor, maybe I could find out what triggered the fire, need to rebuild the house. And all I did from a standpoint, my first 2 years of my career was autism. Because I would have been diagnosed probably as an autism spectrum, Asperger's as my behavior and my mental state when I was a kid. But here's what happens. So I started my career off that way. But then moms started to recognize what I was doing to help their children recover. That they're like, hey, could this help me with my female hormone issues? I said, yeah, if we can find out what's triggering a fire and rebuild your house. See, so let's call medicine the fire department. Thank God that we have emergency rooms and wonderful things that save people's lives from major fires. But most fires are preventable. And on top of it, what if we could rebuild the house and help the body rebuild so we could recover from the things that our house is suffering from? So,
way better.
Exactly. So all I did is I said, I'm a carpenter type doctor. Thank God for medicine, but it's a different perspective. So when a doctor comes and says, I'm going to make you healthy with drug and surgery, I'm like, do you want to debate this issue? Because if you were so right about that in prevention and taking care of things, we wouldn't spend $4.5 trillion. We wouldn't have the sickest population in the most capitalistic country in the world. We wouldn't spend so much per person than anywhere else in the world with the sickest outcomes. I'm a business person. If my outcomes sucked and I didn't get paid, my business was closed down. That's why medicine has to intertwine with government to have all these things involved. Because if it was straight capitalism of me adding value to your life and you getting a good result, they would stop paying them.
Yeah, people that know me know, do not take me to the hospital unless I'm stabbed or shot or it's a real bad emergency, because I've had a lot of doctors offer me a lot of medication. My father got 2 prostate surgeries, both made him worse, and then they wanted to give him morphine. They said, here, take this morphine for the pain. And we were like, we're not going to take, that's going to make him, his liver, his kidneys, everything. It's going to ruin everything.
Well,
it's going to destroy him.
And always go back to my analogy. I understand that if all of a sudden you had a broken arm, you had a major cardiovascular event, you could die from your cancer. Guess what? You may need drugs or surgery to stay alive. But once they get you stable, medical doctor, surgeon, God bless you. Thank you for your amazing talent. I love you. I will always be appreciative of you that way. But I got to rebuild the house.
For sure.
And that's what the wellness way, that's what I came up with. And that's why I said, let's start to rebuild those things. So now, if you go back to what your question was before, is there a difference between male and female, especially when it comes from a hormonal standpoint? Well, absolutely there is. How can I prove that? If I just measured your testosterone levels compared to a woman's, okay? And therefore, guess what happens? By nature, I'm gonna want yours anywhere between 500 and 1200. If those same levels were in a woman, there's physical and mental consequences that would come from that, including PCOS, including androgenesis, including hair loss, including a mustache, including anger and aggression, the physical and mental consequences that come from that. See, so biologically, we can't take care of men and women the same, because we would actually put them in the state where we put them sick. Because that's why if all of a sudden you say, let's say you even need let's say there was something dramatic and you even needed medication. If you gave testosterone replacement therapy to a woman at a man's level, there's physical and mental consequences that would come to that. So that's why when all these things in transgender came out and they started doing this, I'm like, guys, you're going to make these people sick. You're going to make these people sick, and that's not a good thing.
Well, I've spoken about this with people, and a lot of them talk about how a lot of those transgender people, they commit suicide, but the ones that commit the suicide are the ones that actually are injecting the hormones because so many crazy things are happening. Is that true?
Well, I want you to think about it this way. If I were to just have my nurse practitioner give you estradiol to take as a shot or a patch, you would start to adapt female characteristics.
I'd get titties, right?
Yes, you would. You would actually start to get gynecomastia. You would actually have some emotional things change over that, because remember, hormones are even Latin words called messenger. And when you stick a synthetic messenger, your body's going to respond. Do you understand? And so the idea is this. So therefore, you are creating physical and mental consequences from doing that. So the whole idea is this. The whole idea is hormones are produced for a specific reason. What can we do to help rebuild that process back to normal? What is throwing them off? Why are they imbalanced? Why can't my own organs produce them? And see, a carpenter is going to sit there and go, let's rebuild it and let's find out what triggered your fire. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that medicine in many instances isn't needed. See, that's what surprised people on. I'm just saying you'd be surprised if you start to rebuild the house, the need for medication dramatically goes down. Dramatically, and sometimes they can get off all their medications. And in 26 years of being a doc, and all my docs that I have and stuff like that, and the vast majority of us are chiropractors, here's what happens. We've never taken anybody off a medication once, but because of their recovery, they went back to their primary care and they started to wean them off of their medications.
Oh, wow. Wow. And okay, can we talk about autism a little bit? My
Absolutely.
daughter was diagnosed with autism on 4 separate occasions. And she's always been with her mother, and I would always go visit every week, every 2 weeks, because she lives 40 hours away. And she would have meltdowns. It was just very bad. But I've had her with me for about 242 days now, 100% of the time. And I have her on a very strict diet, and we've seen now she's speaking a little bit. I give her certain minerals, vitamins. What is your approach on helping children with autism?
Well, what I want to come back to this is let's go back to my history, how I became what I did, okay? Like I said, my whole first 2 years of practice was strictly autism and child mental health, because that's what got me to go into the route I did. Now, what I did is I got my bachelor's degree and I got my graduate doctorate degree in chiropractic. And I'll explain why I went to chiropractic realm, because my focus in school was actually nutrition and immunology. and stuff. And even my postgraduate, like I've taken several Harvard Medical School online classes on immunology, including one on vaccines and vaccination immunology. I'm in a current class at Harvard Medical School on immune tolerance, about autoimmune diseases and all things that. The professors are great. Now, if you look at the physiological responses that happen in autism, there is usually some neurological response, and that manifests to the world. But a lot of people do not understand this, that the vast majority of autism has an immune component, okay? Because the immune system connects and talks directly to our nervous system. It can actually have an inflammatory response. It can have a very irritating response. It can have a degenerative response. And so therefore, that's why when the whole aspect of vaccines come up, people say vaccines don't cause autism. I'm going to tell your audience right now, vaccines do not cause autism. Let me say this right now. Vaccines do not cause autism. Vaccines cause a major immune response that now the immune response causes massive neurological damage, and now it manifests as autism.
Oh, wow. Okay, see, because with my daughter, when she was born, she was fine. Everything was great. It was my first kid, so I didn't know really what to look for, but everything looked normal. And then when she was 1.5 years, she got the 3 shots. And as soon as she got the shots, she got a temperature.
Thank you. An immune response. An immune response.
The next day, ever since then, she stopped looking at us. Everything changed. And a lot of doctors that I've commented that to, they're like, no, you're crazy. That couldn't have happened. And I'm like, I watched it happen.
But let's go back to this. When you look at the autism spectrum, and the reason why I call it a spectrum, because some people are affected neurologically at a greater response than a lesser response. But it's all very devastating. For example, like I said, at 3rd grade, and I'm 50 years old now, and stuff. Yes, I know I look really good. I know it's my skin. No, I like to joke and have a lot of fun too, because these are very serious topics. But when you look at the spectrum, there can be neurological consequences that can lead to loss of language, loss of function, even to severe mental retardation and everything. And then there's people that, for example, that are just have a pebble in their shoe. Let me explain, Jerry. Remember I told you when I first started this podcast that I felt like my skin was crawling?
Yes.
Okay. So Jerry, you seem like I think we're going to be friends after this podcast. Just I love what you stand for and your attitude and everything like that. Is the fact of this: if you had a very stressful day, and it was just a very disruptive day, and all of a sudden, and everybody can relate to this, and all of a sudden someone says something to you and it's very minor, but you blow off the handle, okay? Because you are constantly irritated all day long, and you're on edge, okay? So my skin felt like it was crawling all the time. So I couldn't focus. And then I would have emotional eruptions because I had that all day. And I ended up getting suspended from school because my skin was irritated so much, and I got in a fight because he was picking on me, and I just lost it emotionally. And so when you see an autism spectrum, they have these responses because internally, and you know, the counselors, my mom, my dad, other people, they behaviorally called me a bad kid, but they didn't realize that internally there was so much massive immune irritation to my nervous system that now it was internal, that they couldn't see it, so they said it's behavioral changes and things like this. So the spectrum is because of the massive or even slight irritation that they have that keeps them in a high inflammatory state for a long period of time. And the neurological consequence and the psychological consequence differs per child and how they respond to immune irritation. So now, yes, and I know people are going to say this. Well, there's people that, and this is a very small amount, but there are people that never got a vaccine and actually on the autism spectrum. You're right. Can foods affect the immune system? Yes. Can deficiencies of vitamin D and vitamin A and other things affect the immune system? Yes and yes. Can actually mental stress do it? Yes. See, but if you look at the burden that children take on their immune systems, it's coming from the medical field.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's scary, yes. I've been to so many doctors all over with my daughter, and they just kicked me out of an office because I said, hey, should I give her fish oils? And he said, oh, yeah, you should, but you should give them to her in gummies. And I said, but if I
All
give her
sugar.
in his gummies, it's going to have a lot of sugar, and that's going to do the opposite of what I'm trying to do, right? And I've been reading a lot, but I'm not a doctor. And he was like, I'm the doctor here. Just get out of here. You don't know. And I'm like, it's just a question, man.
Yeah,
just a question.
But you got to remember this. Okay? And I get to speak to these wonderful doctors, and I get to speak on medical conferences, everything like this. Understand, you're asking them fire department questions. You're asking them, you're asking the fire department carpenter questions. Go back to my analogy. See, very simply is this. And so therefore, you're studying like a carpenter, then going to the fire department and saying, I want to rebuild this room of the house. Yep, you can do that. But, you know what I'm saying? Because they have a general idea. You know what I'm saying? But then vice versa. It's like asking here, watch this. And you see this all the time. And I guarantee you've seen videos about this. They have very little training in specific things you're asking about. But ask me this. Ask me how much training I have in brain surgery. We learn about it, but I can't do it. So why is it okay for me to say that, but the other doctor, they think they know everything? And then if you question them, they move in the totalitarian aspect of experts. Well, you know what some of this? The medical field, as they try to tear on the holistic field, the medical field, a standard practice of care was leeches at one time.
Oh, wow.
Bloodletting.
Wow.
Why don't you look up how our President George Washington died? Okay? Why don't you look at a history of medicine and some of the... Do you understand? Lobotomies, electric shock therapy. And at that time, they were the experts in their field. But there's been one holy grail that is like the biblical of biblical in the medical field you cannot question. And that's the religion of vaccines. And it's a religion.
Yeah, during COVID, I had quite a few issues because I was just telling people, hey, just, think for yourself. This is kind of scary. And I got a couple posts. I got strikes on my pages. And it was just freedom of speech, I thought. And just, hey, just think. Before you stick something in your body that's free from the government, be careful.
Well, yeah, and the idea is this. And I tell people this. It's all about informed consent. It's all about, I'm a big freedom person. You have to have the right to choose. But the sad part is they only give you one side of the story. And it's hard for people to choose when they're indoctrinated since they're kids. And I guarantee, just like with your child, you were, they may call you anti-vax. How'd you get there? Because you had experience, you were pro-vax at one time, and then you became educated because of the suffering. See, I became educated and went in a different direction because I was suffering, and the medical field couldn't help me. So what was I going to do? I loved immunology because of my response I was having as allergies, and I was starting to pull my food away, and then my brain started to change, and I started to get better grades, and I started to actually think clearly, and my skin stopped crawling. And so then I was going to go, okay, now the medical field is the health field, so what? Am I becoming an immunologist? And I learned about vaccines when I was 17 years old, and I said, I'm 50. And I'm sitting there going, as a kid that could think through things, I was going, these things don't make any sense. And then if you, and back then, when I was 13, that was 1987, there wasn't the massive amount of shots that they have today. And so therefore, but people, do you understand, the 1986 Vaccine Protection Act was based on 6 shots that they needed protection, and now there's 72 doses. So you're telling me at 6 we needed protection, but 72 is okay. It's a major assault on the immune system, which now there's a major assault on the neurological system, and that's why they try to say there's no direct correlation. Yes, there is. There's massive direct correlation. You're just trying to go from A to Z, but there's A to B, B to C, C to D, and now the neurological consequence of why we have all these things. And on top of it, they've lied to people so much. Here, the medical field has more corruption than gas and electric and all the fields you hear politicians talking about, yet they're the ones advising our government. Government here, and it doesn't matter what political party you're on. I do a lot with politics, and here's what happens this. But I know how everybody's going to answer on this. Well, not everybody. Even I've met one person in my whole career when it said what I didn't think they would. Who should make the healthcare decisions for you and your family? You or the government? I've only had one person. Thousands and thousands of people ever say the government. The rest like me. Now, some of my very good, nice liberal friends, they'll say, but I want the government to pay for it. Okay, that's a separate issue. But who should make the decision? Well, during COVID, they tried to make your decision for you. And then people like us said, no, No, I know how the immune system is going to respond. And I was kicked off every platform. I just recently was kicked off of TikTok again for the second time. And on top of it, then the FBI showed up at my house because someone didn't like my videos. I've been in practice 26 years. Do you know I've never had a patient complaint? And during COVID, or if I speak on vaccines, they send complaints to the state all the time. Never a patient of the Wellness Way, never have any affiliation with us, never sat down and talked to me and get the full understanding of that way. Because all I have to do is somebody that is very pro-vaccine. Here, if you are on the fence on any vaccine, people send me this message all the time. They'll say, Doc, I'm investigating vaccines. You know, what vaccines would you give if you were in my position? And I have a very clear answer for that. And I'm hoping, Jerry, I can convince you on this too. Okay? I have 4 daughters, 21, 18, 15, and 11, going to be 12 soon. The vaccines that my 4 daughters got are the ones that have all the proper safety studies.
How many have proper safety studies?
Not a fucking one.
Oh, shit. Damn. Wow.
So anybody wants to debate? So let's do this. You bring me the proper safety studies, placebo-based studies, and I can see that they are safe. I know the immune system. Then I would look and go, I'm gonna make the judge the risk ratio benefit that way and decide it that way. But there is never, and they've admitted to it in court, that there's never been a proper safety study done ever. And that's why they fought RFK so much of coming on board, because he's the one that got them to show it in writing and stuff like that. So here's what happens. So if you say they're safe, how can you? There's never been a proper safety study even on COVID vaccine or anything that way. So you can't say that. You are lying. Just say, we are trying this. We don't know the cold consequences. And do you know some of this? And they publish this. The reason why they don't do a proper safety study is because they don't feel ethical of giving the placebo group a like saline solution in the shot than the vaccine itself, because they thought it'd be unethical because they thought they were protected from the disease.
Oh, God.
That's exactly their words.
How scary is that?
But at least blood pressure medication, at least other medication goes through double-blind placebo-based studies. So if you can't show me a safety study, don't tell me they're safe. And I just am not going to roll the dice with a product that has never had any proper safety study. Debate over.
100%.
Now everything you're going to debate me on is just pure emotion.
Yeah, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups for kids with special needs and autism, and every time any parent says, "Hey, a vaccine really, destroyed my child," thousands, hundreds of people will just attack them, and they'll say, "Hey, kick them out of the group," and it's disgusting. It's disgusting.
Well, but let me explain why. Okay, so I've been married almost 24 years now. 20 years to the same beautiful wife, 4 beautiful daughters. When I met her, I will tell you this. It was quite interesting. We had great conversations about it. And my wife hated vaccines when I first met her because she reacted as a child. And my wife was very sick. That's how I got into the whole female hormone problem, because my wife was told she could never have children. And now we have 4 beautiful daughters. Whole nother story, we can get into that too. But here's what happens this. We dated for a year, and I proposed to her. And I proposed to her into a brand new hospital. And I got down on one knee, and she will tell the story, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I got down on one knee, I said, listen, what I'm doing and what I'm going to do, I will go against the grain my whole life.
Love it.
I'm going to be ridiculed, made fun of, treated horribly for what I believe. And if you can tolerate that, I would like you to spend the rest of your life with me.
Oh, wow. And
because I knew what I knew internally, and there was no one that was going to change my mind based on this stuff, not a woman, not my parents, not anything of this. And I was so convicted because of my own suffering experience and everything I did. And of course, obviously, she said yes. But then here's what happens. Our children were born. They were breastfed for a year, no food. My children have never had a bad food. They ate all organically. They ate, they've never had a soda in their life. They've never had these things that way. And
how long do How long do you mind? Sorry to cut you off. How long do you recommend a woman breastfeed a child for?
Okay, you ready for this one? And here, watch this. Watch this. Here we go. And I'll show you why. And it's mainly women that attack other women on those platforms. Because you know why? Because my children would not get food to at least 1 year old, solid food. Because here's what happens. Let's go back to the immune response. Do you understand there's specific organ systems and immune responses do not develop into 1 year to a year and a half? That can't even really sometimes handle the food you put in there, which can now create immune reactions, which now lead to inflammatory responses. Okay? So you let their body develop, and and I love this. And if anybody ever says this to you, they'll say, well, a child needs food, especially after 6 months. Okay, where'd you read that? Can I have a copy of it? Well, my pediatrician said that. Okay, where'd you read that? Can I have a copy of it? Because you're just giving me emotional. And then the minute that you tell people you didn't breastfeed for a year or you didn't feed their kids the way they did, they say, well, you say I'm a bad mom? I didn't tell you and say you were a bad mom. I said I made these choices based on the education and the understanding that we have. Will you say I'm uneducated? Well, yeah, I can say that. And see what they do. We're not saying that you guys were bad parents. We're not saying because you gave your child a vaccine or because you gave your kids food 2 days after they're born or they weren't breastfed that you were a bad parent. Everybody makes decisions on the information that they have. You vaccinated based on the information that you were programmed with your whole life, and then because of suffering and consequence, you started to go, maybe I got to look at this differently.
100%.
And so therefore, that's why they attack, because they're almost, when somebody gives an opinion of their experience, that they want to shut them down because they would say, well, you're saying I'm a bad parent. No one said you're a bad parent. You know, we can see bad parents, okay? And what I mean by that is the vast majority of people want the best for their child. Are there people that abuse kids? Are there people that starve their kids? Yes, there are. Those are called bad people. The vast majority of parents are not bad people. They just don't have the information and they make judgments from what happened to them or what their parents did or all things like this. You know, get this. It's really funny. Remember when we were kids and Jerry, you're probably what, 40 years old or so? You're pretty young.
36, but
there you go. But here's up is this. Man, the parents always said, don't sit too close to the TV and don't watch all these things all the time. It's going to ruin you. And you know that if you look at the history of technology, especially my Christian friends, I'm a Christian person, but especially my Christian friends, new technology they always think is Satan, basically, and it's going to ruin everybody's life and stuff like that. And then your generation grew up a little bit differently. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. To our kids, phones are normal. Remember when cell phones came out, they're like, it's going to hurt everybody and stuff like that. Well, actually, internet has probably made better life for anybody that way. But the point is this. Anything that the way they grew up, or anything that they made a choice with their child, the minute that you offer a different idea, remember, most ideas are met with resistance, good or not. Then you're ridiculed, then you're believed, and then you're looked up to. Mm-hmm. But you know where people give in? The minute that they're ridiculed, they go, oh, I got to stay quiet. But I could never do that. And they're wrong. But here's what happens. I can see from your response, you're frustrated. I used to be frustrated until I realized that God gave each one of us talents. There's men out there, and I tell you this. I can see that I'm gonna make a judgment about you, Jerry. Please tell me if I'm wrong. Because I see some characteristics about us that are similar. Do you know what my favorite movie is? Braveheart. Okay? Let me explain why Braveheart's my favorite movie. And I'm going to tell you my favorite biblical verse too. My favorite part about Braveheart is he believed something so willingly he was willing to die for it. But when there was war, who was the first one that ran towards the conflict? Him. Mm-hmm. He didn't sit back and say, hey, I'm just going to let somebody else do it. He goes, I'm charging first. And if I die for this cause, so be it. My favorite biblical verse is David and Goliath, but not the way people think, because everybody thinks they're David, okay, as far as the little guy. When David, who showed up as a pizza delivery guy that day, because remember, he was there to feed his brothers, okay? Yeah. Guess what happens? I'm just a lonely chiropractor with a bachelor's and some postgraduate degrees and stuff like that. The Goliath is, the real doctors over there, the pediatricians and vaccine companies and stuff like that. And I'm sitting there going, and David goes, who are these idiots? And Goliath yelling at them, going this as he goes. He says to the king, let me go after these people. And the king's like, be quiet. I've had colleges, I've had natural people say, dude, don't ruffle the feathers. But then David ran to the conflict. You know what men like us do? We run to the conflict.
100%.
Now,
every time.
Did God give all those qualities to everybody? No, he didn't. And so your frustration should be, you're going to go from frustration to empathy. You say, maybe God didn't give that man the ability to run in the conflict. But he has given some of us that. And we have to be willing to take those arrows. And if we die for the cause, so be it.
Yeah, with my daughter, I see a lot of parents, they really, really struggle when their kids have autism. And I feel like this was all God. I feel like everything's just always through God. There's no coincidences. And I feel like I always ask for more sympathy, to be more empathetic, to be a stronger man. And she gives me I've been learning all that through her.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for it all, man. I'm great. And her story is actually helping other people. It's giving other kids hope, because we're actually really looking for solutions. Talking to people like you, man, is one of the best things we could do, because you have the information. So what do you think about formula? If people don't breastfeed, I heard there's a lot of heavy metals in formula. Is that true?
Well, you got to look at it this way. How you create something, any kind of food, and the processing is very important. Now, are there great formulas out there? Absolutely. There's wonderful women out there that want to breastfeed and can't. They have inverted nipples, they have stuff like this. And there's wonderful companies out there that do make good formulas. Now, do I want something that's highly processed and things like that? No. But see, and here's what happens. And if everybody started focusing on all the best quality products, the crappy products would go away. They really would. And they become actually more available and actually even more cost effective. People say, Doc, how do I get healthier food cheaper? Well, the first thing is this. Number one, you have to ask, why is it cheaper? And number two, stop buying the cheap stuff. And everybody yells at, and I'm happy they do this. But they protested Nabisco or protested Kellogg's, stuff like that. I'm cool with that. But do you know what every CEO and board of Kellogg's would do if they stopped eating Lucky Charms? They would stop producing it, and they make some organic ones.
100%.
See, so I tell people, just use your dollars in great capitalism and go find the good products that way and stuff
100%.
like that. Stop, and I don't mind protesting, but here's what happens this. You're going to only protest till the next, if all of a sudden the strongest liberal comes in and becomes like Gavin Newsom, and the whole woke thing can come back. They can fire RFK. They can support all the bad stuff, and you're right back here. Guys, I do a lot of stuff politically, but I'm more of a person that says let's empower the people, because the vast majority of people will make decisions based on good capitalism. Put your good money where it belongs, because you exchange value. Capitalism, true capitalism, not what you see in a lot of this in the United States, but true capitalism is if you have something of value, a person's going to want it, you give it to them, they say thank you, they pay you, you say thank you back. Capitalism is good thank you business. When you involve government in it, there is no thank you. Mm-hmm. Somebody on their side, one person says thank you, the rest get screwed. And that's why you got to keep government out of business. You got to keep government out of healthcare. You got to keep government out of these things. And government should be there to administrate and keep everything fair and keep everything where there's capitalism, because if I don't agree with Kellogg's, well, then I'm just going to do my own cereal, and I'm going to do better and create more value, and I'm just going to beat you because I'm going to offer better value than you did.
100%. And okay, so when you were working with children with autism, what were the success cases that you saw? Like, were they nonverbal, then they had just a great life, or?
So let me give you an example. So I got a text message from a very wonderful man. His name is Aaron, and this was just yesterday. I haven't spoken to him. We went golfing last fall. I've known him. His son is now 19 years old. When I met him, he was nonverbal, stimmed massively, did not function. They said he will be mentally, and this is the exact words they use, mentally retarded the rest of his life that way. Well, let's just say his name. I'm not going to say his name to keep it private that way, but his son, who is now 19 years old, lives a normal life, just started college, did everything that way, and they thought he was going to be mentally retarded the rest of his life. Now, here's what happens. That's a great success story. Sometimes you have people that have had severe damage and permanent damage to where maybe they got some major cognitive things back, maybe they learned sign language. Here's what happens. The one thing I'm so convinced on is the amazing aspect of the human body. And I've seen stuff recover that would blow your mind. Are there things that can cause permanent damage? Yes, we see that. But the one thing I know this, a person, I've taken care of a woman that was 93 years old, and she said, Doc, do you think anything can help? And I said, instead of saying something to you, can I do something to you? And she's like, yes. And I said, do you trust me? She was, yeah, you take care of my family. I said, I'm going to do something a little weird to you. Okay? And I took, a little finger prick, for like a blood spot.
Yeah.
And I said, can I do this to your finger? She says, yes. I poked it. It caused some damage. It started to bleed, just a little bit. And I said, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to stare at it. You can forget all about it. And what's going to happen to that damage in your finger? She said, it's going to heal. I said, your body's meant to heal. Sometimes people have that pebble in their shoe all day long, and they're irritated all day long. I didn't realize for myself as a young child that was an egg. I didn't realize that, let's say a heavy metal gets stuck in your body and it's a constant pebble in your shoe, and there's neurological and immunological consequences that happen that way. So no matter what aspect of spectrum, condition you're suffering with, your body wants to heal. And if the damage is not permanent, you'd be surprised what can happen if you start to rebuild the body.
So I see a lot of stuff about zeolites. Have you heard of zeolites?
Of course, I've used it my whole career.
And you believe in it? It's good?
Well, it's not good for everybody. It's not going to have the same effect on everybody. And that's one thing I really get frustrated with in the natural world. If you look at the natural world over on TikTok and Instagram over the last year, I roll my eyes about all this parasite stuff, all the cleanses. I just want it, or all the NAD supplement stuff that way. They act like it's a drug and it's gonna fix everything. And we have to stop looking at supplements. Here's what happens: this, the water can put out every fire, but guess what happens is there's no two houses that are the same, and how you deal with the house and rebuild the house is different for everybody. So when people say everybody needs this, yes, we understand there's foundational things, trace minerals, micronutrients, microbials that we do need. And because some of the things that happen at birth in the medical field, they destroy those things. So they start you off really bad. You see, it's just that what happens is this. But zeolite is not going to affect everybody the same, because what is causing that immunological or neurological stress isn't the same with everybody.
Yeah, because I see a lot of videos all the time where it's like fear-based, and people are selling a product and they're like, my child, after taking this in 2 days, everything was fine. And I've given my daughter different brands of zeolites, and a lot of people have seen her progress.
Yep.
And when they ask me, I'm like, hey, I don't know. This is what we've tried, but in my opinion, it's diet number one. I'm not going to sell you no product. And I've had companies say, hey, say this product is what helped your daughter, because I have it documented how much she's progressed.
Yep.
But I'm like, dude, I don't believe that. It might have had part of an impact. I believe everything has a little impact, of course. But so what's a good, is there a specific diet? I mean, I know everybody's a little different, but are there certain things, children, like a common thing they should stay away from if they want to heal their autism, if they want to heal that?
Well, we got to think of it differently, okay? Because let's go back to the spectrum. There's multiple things that can irritate the immune system. Now, don't get me wrong. The people, and I've used zeolite my whole career, the people who have had heavy metal effects from their immune system and nervous system, I don't disagree that people, even on TikTok or things that use it and saw a benefit. But let me see a question. Is heavy metals one of the contributing factors to everybody's spectral disorder?
No, I don't think so.
No, and you even know that. So therefore, what it comes down to is this. So therefore, that's where I will say more in the holistic natural care, it has to be very individualized. And so therefore, figuring out what a child needs, because here's what happens this. Now, when I went to college, I went for college for nutrition and immunology. Now here's what happens. What really got me to become what I did today was I reacted to eggs. Now, I can tell you from all my nutritional classes and everything I know about nutrition and my bachelor's and my doctorate and my postgraduate schools and stuff like that, and my education. I could probably prove to you the egg is one of the best protein, good fatty acid, flowing, everything. I mean, so many great things, okay? But to me, it could be a toxin, a poison. Do you follow me on that?
Yes, yes.
See, so therefore, when care is so generalized, so what diet's good for everybody? There isn't. Jim Sam?
Yeah.
Now, do I think that there are some diets that are more inflammatory? Yes. Then that could irritate the immune system and irritate the nervous system. Yes. And that's why people, when they first start to clean up their diet, they get rid of all the processed stuff. You say, I think that's good for everybody. Do you say, But then what you can do, I would look at getting some allergy testing done. Because, I remember when I had a scratch test done, measuring the IgEs, I reacted. I used to even test myself every once in a while and just rub some egg on my skin and stuff like that, and there'd be a red spot, okay? Now, the cool thing is I've had my scratch test done again, and it's been gone. And I've actually even introduced duck eggs in my system for the last 10 years. Now, I know patients that they have a IgE allergy test for 30 straight years and it doesn't go away because they may have some permanent response. Now they can never get rid of it, okay? See, so that's why when people ask me about overall generals, it's very difficult because right now I love duck eggs. There's so much massive benefit to it. I'm still a little nervous to eat a chicken egg, even though I don't test for it that way, just because my past history.
Yeah.
But and get this, and ask my wife this: do you know that sometimes I still get up today, and my skin feels like it's crawling, and I can't even put my T-shirt on yet, and it's still hard for me to wear high collars because my skin gets irritated a little too easily. Okay.
Oh wow.
And I'm 50, but see now, and I can even feel myself getting agitated, Jerry. But here's my point. As a child, you don't understand that. As an adult, I do. So I can control my emotions stoically. When you're 7, 10, 11, and 15, and you just think that this is you, and you have that emotional outburst because you've been irritated by so many things, not just what's happening internally, they call them behavioral issues. No, those poor young kids are suffering internally just like I was when I was a kid.
For sure. Oh, man. So an allergy test is a good place to start for a kid with autism?
I believe it is because here's what happens this. There's got to be, and that's why you said, now watch this. You even said it. You changed your daughter's diet. You gave her less irritable, inflammatory, neurological responses because, see, when your immune system gets, let's say has to respond, there's an inflammatory response. That means there's an increase of blood flow, increase of histamine, increase of glutamate. Glutamate, as you know, is the most excitatory neurotransmitter. That's why, people realize this. They say, oh, I see a kid in autism stim. Of course you do. Do you know what stimming does for the nervous system? Jerry, do me a favor. Take your hand like this and shake it. Okay, now stop. What do you feel?
A little tingling in my hand.
Proprioceptive stimulation. Very calming to the nervous system. That's why these kids are irritated on the inside and they try to calm their system down. It's an innate response. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
And so, therefore, they could have. Now, watch this. Let me ask you a question, Jerry. Can the weather affect your immune system? Come on, talk to me.
I believe so, yes.
Can mental stress?
100%, right?
Bad food?
100%.
Vaccines?
1,000%.
Get my point? See,
Yeah.
so it's the job of a carpenter-type perspective to say, what is irritating your child? And let's try to pull those things away. And maybe your daughter needs a stool test. Because let me ask you a question, Jerry. Can viruses irritate the immune system and nervous system?
I believe so.
Parasites?
I believe so.
Fungi? Bacteria?
I'm sure, yeah.
So this is the carpenter-type approach going, maybe your daughter's room of her house has a termite infection. Get my analogy?
Yeah.
And you go talk to the fire department doctors and say, hey, what about this, this, this? Yeah, but, yeah. Do you get my point?
I've had a lot of doctors tell me, hey, the only thing that's going to help her is this medication. And then I always ask, okay, what is this going to do to her? What is this going to do to the rest of her body? And then they just do not like when I ask
but that's
questions.
Okay, because see what happens this. What they want to do is sedate her. And would you see, by their category, an improved neurological response? Yes, you would.
she'd be like, yeah, she would look more on the outside better, but in the long run, it would pretty much destroy her life, right?
Well, let me ask you a question. When the water hits the wall, does it kind of calm the fire down? Yes or yes?
Yes,
But does it cause a little destruction to the carpet, the pictures, and everything else around it?
for sure.
See, and they say, Jerry, those are just side effects, don't worry. No, stop lying to people.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
That's good.
See, your analogy, go back to my analogy. That analogy will help you have more conversations with people in order to say, listen, God bless, thank you for your opinion, doctor, because that's what it is. You know what's really funny? I always laugh about this. Let's say you talk to a doctor, and they act like it's, biblical gospel when they tell you something. And you say, I'm going to go get a second what?
Opinion.
What do you think the first thing was in the first place?
They don't like that.
And because they're the closest thing to Jesus, when I started practice, you had Jesus and a medical doctor, and you didn't question him. You know the greatest thing that happened in healthcare was the internet, because you couldn't pull the wool over people's eyes anymore.
Hey, one time my dad went to a doctor, and my dad called me, and he said, hey, this doctor said if I don't get a stent, I'm going to have a heart attack and die within 6 months. And I said, let's go get a second opinion. We went to this other guy, and he said, no, your heart's fine.
Yeah. Well, can I share my wife's story?
Please.
So all of a sudden, I met my beautiful bride, and we started dating. And 2 weeks in our dating life, she looked at me and she said, hey, I talked to you, and I wasn't even a doc yet, I was in my internship. And I came to her house, and she was crying. And I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And she started telling me a story that she's been sick her whole life. Now, we've been dating for 2 weeks, and I had no idea yet. She had endometriosis, cystic acne, ulcerative colitis, and actually cluster headaches.
What's that first one, if you don't mind me asking?
Endometriosis is where ladies within the uterus have an endometrial lining that grows and replicates. That's why they have the menstruate every month and stuff like that. But it can leave the uterine lining and become overgrown inside the uterus and also outside the pelvic area.
Okay.
And so what happens is, and she's been through hell, and they told her she can never have children. And so guess what happens? So the current doctors that she was seeing, aka let's call them fire department doctors, said, listen, you can't have kids, and you should, get surgery and get your uterus removed, because eventually it can turn to cancer. Now, let me see a question. Was that a correct opinion?
I don't think so.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was a perfect opinion. Because
but from the information they had, right?
And if you listen to their guidance.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Do you follow me in that?
Yes.
See, they gave you opinion based on their experience, because they
think they're right what they're saying, right?
Exactly, because they have no other tool. They don't even look at it, and they don't even acknowledge there could be something different.
So some of those people are specialists, right?
Yes, but I have defined what a specialist is.
That's what I'm saying.
You ready for it?
Please.
A specialist is a person who knows more and more about less and less. They hone down. You have a heart specialist. Cool. And heart specialist says, listen, and we remember this from the 80s, an aspirin a day is good for your heart. And the specialists are correct. They are correct. But you know what the neurologist says? No, because you know why? It thins the blood so much and actually weakens the epithelial lining and causes them to actually have problems, to the point where our smallest capillaries are in our body, in our brain, start to rupture and has a stroke. So stroke wasn't even on the category until that was brought out. But the expert, the cardiologist, the specialist said in his little box of cardiology says, and they can even prove it to you in their studies, that it's good for the heart. But they didn't say it was good for the whole body.
They're not looking at the rest of the body, right?
Exactly. And see, that's the difference. So I said, so a specialist is a person that knows more and more about less and less, and the specialists don't talk. And then they go to, and then all of a sudden you stroke out, or in here, if you take an aspirin a day, people, you know this, you bump your arm, you start to bruise because it thins your capillaries. And then you go to the doctor that handles your capillaries and says, your medication is doing this. I'm going to give you another medication to counteract it because I still want you, and then that's how it all happens. See, we need a bigger approach to this that way. Now, I'm not saying that you may not need, make this very clear. There are some people that may need some medications. God bless, we have them, But we've seen this experiment for 70 years of over-drugging and over-vaccinating our kids. And if they're so correct, why are we so damn sick?
There's more sick than ever, right? Right now it's like worse than ever.
Yes. Remember, I don't get government assistance. I don't do insurance and things like this. The only way that my company went from one office to offices all over is because of results and value brought in. You understand?
Sure.
Because let's say you even just said for a patient that you said something and it didn't come true. Well, then they would left you and you wouldn't have any more patients. See, it's like if you have a restaurant and you suck at food, you may be open for a little bit, but you're going to close. 26 years and more and more and more, and then other healthcare providers started to say, can you speak at our conferences? Could I come work at the Wellness Way? So then nurses and nurse practitioners, other people started to come on. And I have buddies that are pharmacists. They love it. I have people that are medical people. They say, listen, doc, I don't want to do medical stuff. I want them to be under you guys' care. And once again, and it doesn't negate. Now remember, and I think medicine should consistently come up with wonderful things to save lives, like an emergency room and great technology. God bless, we need the fire department. But if you think that you're going to rebuild a house with an axe and hose, you think you're going to rebuild a body with a drug or surgery, please, I have oceanfront property in Arizona to sell you too. You remember that song from the 80s? I got some oceanfront property in Arizona. Jimmy Buffett.
So what about people with that have diabetes, that they're already on insulin? Can they reverse that?
Well, you got to think of it this way. You have to understand, first of all, is it type 2 or is it type 1? Because once again, type 1, that meant you triggered an immune response. So what's irritating that immune response? Second of all, type 2, there's massive habitual things that you've caused your blood sugar to stay at a very high level, end up at insulin resistance, and now you're a bad idea. And so a bad situation, and you got to change the idea of how you approach your food and how you approach things that way. And remember, in each case is individualized. I can honestly tell you, if you look at statistically, if you're in type 2, the average American eats about 3,500 calories a day. We only roughly burn about 2,500 calories a day. If you're really healthy, it's lower if you're not healthy. And so therefore, and that's why when I watch some of these natural people say calories don't matter, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. They'll say, look at a 1,000 calories of Oreos and 1,000 calories of broccoli are different. Calorie standpoint, they're not. Long-term consequences of adding very stressful processed food has its other kind of consequences, but still calories are calories. You know, Sam? There was a scientist that actually ate Twinkies for 3 months, but he kept his calorie intake low, and guess what happens? He lost weight, his blood sugar went down, stuff like this. Now, Durham, do I believe there's going to be other consequences of putting that highly processed food in your body? Yes, and it may manifest a year or 2 or 3 down the road, okay? But if you wanted to lose weight and change some things, that probably did help, okay? And see, that's why you have to look at individual-wise that way. They're very important.
And what about thyroids? I know a lot of people that have thyroid issues, and the first thing I always hear is that they give them a pill that they have to take every single day for the rest of their life. Well, if someone has done that, can they if they've been taking a pill for a couple years, can they get off of it?
Well, I can only tell you from clinical experience, but let's start with the first thought process. When that doctor, the fire department doctor says, hey, listen, a room of your house isn't doing well. I'm gonna give you something, and we're going to maintain the heat in that room for a long period of time. You just need to take this every day the rest of your life. Sounds pretty simple, right? Well, once again, do you ever ask the question of what caused your thyroid to be off, and can it be rebuilt to actually help get back to normal function? In a lot of cases, yes. Now, once again, you can ask me this question. I'll ask it myself if you're asking me it. Doc, have you had people to where they came into you, they started doing certain things that affected their thyroid, and then they got to go back to their doctor, let me say it again, because their labs started to change, their T4 and T3 levels started to go high because they were taking thyroid medication. Why actually getting better? And did the doctor wean off medication? Yes, that happens thousands of times, okay?
Oh, wow.
Now, and I'm using thousands because I have hundreds of doctors across the country and things like that. I've done it myself hundreds of times and stuff like that. Now, once again, did I ever tell them what to do with a medication? Absolutely not. Have I ever gave medical advice? Absolutely not. We talk about a thyroid condition. They don't own the physiology of the body. They own pharmacology. And I don't give opinions on what to do with your medications. I don't tell you to do or not do a medication that way. It's just that, once again, when you look at certain things, now, once again, I can say this, though. Every medication, here, let's take a thyroid medication, let's take an aspirin, let's take anything. If we're supposed to take one pill, and you take the whole bottle, do you know that you could possibly die from that? Those toxic effects, okay? Because do you understand that a medication's definition, look at this up, is called a non-lethal dose of a lethal substance?
You know, I saw that on toothpaste, that if you have a little bit too much, if you eat too much toothpaste, that it could be called the poison center.
Sure. Well, remember, because once again, at certain concentrations, it can be very bad. So I can warn people saying, listen, that just be careful. Medicines by nature, even though they could be life-saving, even though they could put out the fire, even though they could help you get through a tough situation, just understand there's consequences. And I want people to to sit there and know the consequences and actually talk about the risk benefit ratio and let them figure it out. You see, but the minute you question the risk ratio, especially when it comes to vaccines, a doctor will talk to you about all risk ratios. Usually, they'll always say the benefit outweighs the risk. But you ever question vaccines, you just basically stepped on the greatest religion on the planet.
I've had that issue quite a few times.
Yeah, of course.
They all, I'd say about 60 to 70%, maybe a little bit more, have said the same story. No, some guy in the 90s said that and he was debunked. It's always the same thing. So they are safe, and I'm, okay. You know, they just know we're not going to get anywhere.
Well, you got to think this way. There is no such thing as a safe medication, because safe would be that there is no negative reaction. Well, do you understand? Do you understand an egg is, when I was a kid and when I actually, in college, an egg wasn't safe for me.
Yeah.
Well, doc, you don't like processed non-organic things. What if you eat an organic egg? Good, I'd be organically dead.
Yeah.
See, so that's why when they talk about safety being the fact that you didn't react, and you understand they have even been caught from corruption-wise of not doing long enough studies or saying these side effects are minimal. And see, and to give you guys, and I want to talk about this so you know this, okay? To show you vaccine science, which isn't science, okay, is this. I'm going to prove to you, Terry, that Jack Daniels does not make you drunk. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you, you think with a double-blind placebo study, placebo is something inert and doesn't have any physiological reaction, like water. That's why a sugar pill, water, things like this. So you think the study would be 8 shots of Jack Daniels, 8 shots of water. Nobody knows what they get. You see the physical and psychological and things that change. You say, well, look it. Compared to the placebo, those people walk different, talk different, thought different. Yeah, there's a negative side effect to having 8 shots compared to water. That's double-blind, placebo-based studies. That's the gold standard for medicine. Well, let me show you.
There's not one on that. There's not one of those.
Well, let me show you what vaccines do. Vaccines say, we're going to give you 8 shots of Jack Daniels, but the placebo is 8 shots of tequila. So therefore, guess what? Look it. No different than a placebo. It's safe.
Wow. I did not know that.
That's why if you look at the placebo for vaccine trials is another vaccine.
Wow. How scary is that? Oh, my God.
That's science.
Oh, my God.
That's basic science. So when you see people like us say, listen, I will give every vaccine that shows a proper safety study where they're safe. And guess what happens? And they still have not done one. And they were caught red-handed, and they admitted it, and they still have not done it that way. And then what they do is if they try to do it with a placebo, it'll be like for a couple days, and then they'll go back to the vaccine to show the immune response that way categorized. And it's really sad. So, and because all you have to do is catch catchphrases, okay? It's like, it's safe and effective. The benefits outweigh the risk. You get conditioned that way. That's propaganda since you were little. They do that in politics. They do that in healthcare. It's the same companies.
Oh, my God. Now, do you get people that are depressed and you notice a difference? They're really down. They feel bad. Maybe they're on depression meds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then changing their whole diet just changes their whole life?
You're going to see in the vast majority, when they make positive changes, they do see a psychological change. Got to remember, there's nothing good psychologically comes from a bad diet. You see, it doesn't. There's major consequences to that, And that's why when people, in my career, it's happened less in the last 5 years, but doctors used to tell people nutrition has nothing to do with your health. You think I'm joking? They've heard direct things said to them that way, and it's really frustrating. But there's major consequences to those things. There's deficiencies. There's a lot of things that people are missing, that can help with those things. There's hormonal things that happen. And I think what happens is this. There's also misrepresentation of psychological health compared to men and women, which is dramatically different. For example, with a man, testosterone has an effect on their psychology. On a woman, estrogens and progesterones and all their hormones have an effect on their psychology. A man can be a little bit more mentally stable because we don't have any fluctuations in our testosterone much, besides it's a little higher in the morning. That's why we get the morning erection. Women, cyclic women, fluctuate in their hormones change 4 times in a month. And my funny joke is that's why there's no such thing as a mentally stable woman, because they change 4 times in a month.
Thank you for watching the whole video. Sorry it cut off like that. We had some technical difficulties, so I'm going to do a part 2 with the doctor. Obviously, he's a genius. He knows what he's talking about. So any questions you guys have, put them in the comments. I'm going to be doing another interview on him in these days. I hope you guys are well and your family as well. Thank you for watching.